To our surprise, instead of rugged mountains, we found a beautiful valley stretching out before us. This valley is called Chubai. Although it is 16,000 feet above sea level, either side of the valley is skirted by the fine forest whose heavy leafy trees were very luxuriant. Ahead of us we saw villages with beautiful temples. We did not go through the valley but took the shorter trail by way of Tachi Cho Chong, then on to Porta Tatsanga. Even this trail proved good. We had proceeded but a short distance when we entered a beautiful forest with small streams on every hand. Here we saw an abundance of songbirds and wild fowl. We had not encountered a predatory wild animal on the entire trip. This probably accounted for the abundance of wildlife. Our next stopping place was at Mahamuni. I can't pronounce these words. Its fortress-like temple intrigued us, and here, as always, we received a hearty welcome. Those in charge told us that it would be useless to ask us to remain longer, as the Master Purji had preceded us to the temple Porta Tatsanga, where many yogis, sadhus, and gurus were gathering, and that we would have a good company on our last day's journey. Early the next morning the pilgrims were assembled, anxious to be on their way to keep their tryst with the great Master Purji. All were eager to get the first glimpse of Porta Tatsanga, as they expressed it, a jewel set in a rock ledge, the most lofty of any temple in the world. Would we stay at Mahamuni when this great prize loomed just ahead of us? Sang the laughing Chela. Oh no, fare thee well, Mahamuni. We love you and shall return to your tender embraces. To journey to Porta Tatsanga is irresistible. So the cavalcade moved on. The great Everest was before us, standing out in the light of approaching dawn, stark and white in its robe of pure crystal. It seemed to beckon us to take just a few steps more, reach out our hands and touch the hem of its garment. Yet when we had taken the first few steps, its mass still eluded us. Kamohari, its near neighbor, 24,000 feet high, which we had passed, now seemed a pygmy compared with the monster just before us. We thought the trail on its flanks stony and perilous, but now we labored over a trail much of the distance, on hands and knees. Still, the song and laughter of the Chela bore us onward as though on wings. In our enthusiasm, we forgot the dangers. It seemed that we accomplished these places instantly. The sun, while it dispelled the illusion of touching mighty Everest in another stride, revealed grandeurs of which description in words would only become a travesty. There were towers and great temples of nature crowned with crystal on every hand, but Everest, great Everest, lay before us. We saw it in the moonlight, with the first light of budding dawn, as the first rays of sunrise kissed its fair brow, then with the full rays of the noonday sun steaming down upon it, and again as the sun gradually faded and bade it good night, with the last rays bathing it in glory, the afterglow raising an answering glow toward heaven upon its great crest. Can you, dear reader, not see why the trail that day was not long and arduous? It all passed in an instant, the vibrations of strength, peace, and power and harmony that are always sent forth from the temples but serve to urge travelers on to these peaks. Do you wonder that the Himalayas engender no fear in man? Do you wonder that poets never tire of singing their grandeur? Finally, at nightfall, the trails were all conquered and we stood gasping on a flat table-like rock of considerable extent. In the distance before us were many temples, but the jewel, Porta Tatsanga, stood out 2,000 feet above us, bathed in dazzling light. It seemed like a great arc lamp sitting in a crevice in the perpendicular rock wall, its light lighting up the rocks and temples all about us. Here in the amphitheater on the rock where we stood was a great concourse of men and women. To our surprise, we found that women were not barred from this pilgrimage. All who would could come. Here great rishis have lived. Along this trail the Risha Nari had passed. Thrice the 5 brothers had passed over this trail, once alone, once with their great mother, and again with the great and good Dharapate, the pride and grandeur of all womanhood. Here now sits Yoga Santi, the great, the pure, but the humble one in deep samadhi. Where can all these great ones find shelter and food? We suggested. Do not worry about food or shelter, sang the laughing Chela. There is an abundance here of food, shelter, and clothing for all. Sit down, everyone, came in sweetest tones through the voice of the Chela. No sooner were all seated than great bowls of nourishing hot food appeared. The Yogi Shanti arose and began passing the food around, assisted by the Chela and others. When their hunger was appeased, all arose and were conducted in groups to the neighboring temples there to pass the night. The temple to which we were conducted by the Chela was upon a perpendicular, table-like ledge about 75 feet above where we and the others were standing. As we approached, we noticed a long pole with its base resting upon the rock where we stood, its top resting on the shelf-like rock above. As it seemed to be the only means of communication, we gathered at its base and looked up. As we stood thus, other groups joined us. There were a number of other temples built in the niches formed by other ledges just above the first shelf. For a moment, our only hope of shelter for the night seemed to depend upon our ability to negotiate this pole. Then the Chela said, "Don't hurry." Through his voice came a great burst of song. "O loved one, through you we look for shelter this blessed night." Instantly, everyone around stood silent for a moment. As with one voice they spoke forth these words with dynamic power. Such is the God power, Aum, A-U-M. Instantly, all were standing on the rock ledge, and we, with the rest, proceeded to our respective temples. When we arrived at the temples assigned to us, every trace of fatigue had left. We slept like babes that night. The emanations of power sent out by that group would have leveled mountains had it been so directed. The next morning, at 4, we were awakened by the voice of the Chela, ringing out loud and clear. Nature is walking, so should the children of nature awake. The morn of a new day is just dawning. The freedom of the day awaits you. Aum. We went to the ledge where the top of the pole had rested the evening before and found to our surprise that the pole had been replaced by a well-built stairway. As we walked down, we wondered if we had been dreaming the night before. The Chela met us at the foot of the stairway and said, "No, you have not been dreaming. The stairs were dreamed there last night. The Master Purji placed them there for the convenience of all. So you see, they are a dream which came true." During our stay of 2 weeks in that region, we were served with hot, nourishing food. In no instance did we see food being prepared, yet we were bountifully served. The Chela and one other started to climb the Porta Tatsanga. The first approach was by means of crude steps cut in the rocks. Then there were planks across fissures which made yawning canyons below. Part of the ascent was accomplished with the aid of ropes made fast in crevices above. Although the two men climbed for 2 hours, they made no headway beyond the second ledge, which was about 500 feet from their starting point. They decided they would be obliged to give it up. When they hesitated, Yogi Santi, knowing their plight, called to them, "Why don't you come down?" The Chela replied, "We are making the attempt, but the rocks are holding us fast." They were having the experience of many that it is easier to climb a sheer rock wall than to come down. "Well, why not stay there?" jested the yogi. "We will return tomorrow with food. Perhaps by then you can climb to the top." He then admonished them to keep perfectly calm, as he realized the difficult situation they were in. After 3 hours of careful direction, they were with us again. With a sigh, the yogi murmured, "Thus wanes the enthusiasm of youth." The youth looked longingly upward. "If Master Purji stays there, it will probably be our bad luck to stay here. That trail is too troublesome for us." "Don't worry," said the yogi. "A higher one than yourself will take care of that. Now rest. You made an excellent start." Many asked when we would be able to see the great master. The yogi answered, "This evening." We wondered how a temple could have been built in the position of Porta Tat Sangha that Porta Tat Sangha occupied. The Master Purji came and talked with us during the evening meal. The failure of the attempt to climb to the temple was mentioned. The master said that they had succeeded because they had made the second attempt. At 4 the next evening, we all gathered below the temple. The yogi, Santi, sat in Samadhi. 3 of the company walked to a large flat stone and seated themselves as though in prayer. In a very few moments the stone began to rise, and all were carried to the temple on the stone. Then Yogi Santi said to the Chela and 2 others, "Are you ready?" "Yes." They all answered eagerly and sat down on the rock beside him. Instantly the rock began to move gently, and together they were transported to the temple roof. Then our turn came. We were asked to stand in a group. Then all arose to their feet, and those at the temple came forward on the roof and began to chant Om. In less time than it takes to relate, we were standing on the roof of the temple. Within the space of a few moments, all were gathered at the highest temple in the world. When we were seated, the Master Purji began speaking. "There are a number among you who have never witnessed body levitation, and they wonder. Let me say there is no wonder about it. It is a power which belongs to man. We look upon it as knowledge of ancient yoga. Many people have used it in the past, and it was not looked upon as miraculous. Gautama Buddha visited many distant places through the levitation of his physical body. Thousands of people have I seen that have made the accomplishment, and there are much greater evidences of power than this that you will see, evidences of a great irresistible force that can be used to move mountains when brought under complete control.